Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the All African Conference of Churches for putting together this very important webinar, particularly at this time in the life of the African continent. I will pace my presentation so that the interpreter has the opportunity to capture what I'm saying. I'll therefore not speak at the normal pace. I'll try to be a little slower. I think that would be beneficial for purposes of proper appreciation of what it is that I want to share with you very briefly. Let me start by saying that today is a very important day because we choose to commemorate the African child. And this commemoration is born out of the events that commenced on the 16th day of June in the year 1976 in Soweto, in South Africa. I remember I was then a Form 2 student, and I remember so very vividly that that is the point in time that the international community was able to appreciate from a totally different perspective the atrocities of the apartheid regime in South Africa. I think it was the most dramatic demonstration of man's inhumanity to man, being aware, of course, that in 1960 there had been a Sharpeville massacre. And today when we speak and we remind ourselves that as Africans we have regained independence, and I heard the good Reverend talk about Africa being our mother continent and the future, I can't agree more with him. But yet there is a sense in which Africa continues to be promising and disturbing at once. When I read the works of some of the early thinkers and great Pan-Africanists, you see the problems that we have today have a long history. As early as 1963, Kwame Nkrumah, writing in a book which I commend to all young Africans must unite, said, so long as we are balkanized, regionally or territorially, we shall be at the mercy of colonialism and imperialism. How right and prophetic Kwame Nkrumah was. We remain balkanized, we remain divided, and we remain weak. And he said again, writing in 1965 in his book, Neocolonialism, that African countries continue to remain in unviable units, which we call countries. And as long as we remain unviable, we will always be susceptible to manipulation. The Africa that I'm talking about now, the Africa in which you young men and women must live in, is that Africa. That Africa, as I look at her now, and I said she's both promising and disturbing, is an Africa that has great potential. But look at her now. If you read the media in Ethiopia now, we have young children and women being subjected to atrocities which cannot be understood except by those who are its victims in Tigray. There's a problem there. I'll continue shortly.
Okay, Professor. Thank you.
Excuse me, this thing is running out of charge.
So the Africa that we are talking about is a troubled Africa. It is a troubled Africa in the sense that there are too many conflicts that are taking place even as I speak. And because of that, many young Africans think that the continent has no future. I've only mentioned about Tigray, but if you go to South Sudan, the problem is the same. If you go to Sudan in the Nuba Mountains, in places such as the Blue Nile and Darfur, the problem is the same. If you go to Central Africa and most of the Sahelian region, whether it's in Chad or in Mali or in Cameroon, the problem is the same. The net effect, therefore, is that we are in a very difficult situation. And that is why many young Africans, even as I speak, hold the view that the continent does not promise them much. Many times you see young men and women risking their lives, crossing the Sahara Desert and crossing the desert that they may go into Europe. And many are they that perish in the Mediterranean Sea. And it's not only in the Mediterranean Sea that they perish. Many of them also run to the Arab world, to Qatar, to Dubai, to Oman. And the stories that emanate from such parts of the world is one of modern day slavery. In the intervening period, we have within our continent a continent that is divided into 55 countries, a continent with a population of nearly 1.5 billion. We have that continent with so much promise, laboring under different weights. And sometimes it is important to point out some of the weaknesses that we may talk about the strengths. It is not lost on me that we have young men from Togo, from Cameroon, from Senegal, from Zambia, from South Africa, and different parts of the world. Yet the irony is that these countries which have so much promise, including the ones that I have not mentioned, do not show promise to our young men and women. I remember when I was a young student, Zimbabwe used to be a country that we admired because she was described as the breadbasket of Southern Africa. What has happened to Zimbabwe that as I speak to you now, over 4 million of our children are outside of Zimbabwe? What has happened to Angola or Mozambique? What has happened to Nigeria? What has happened to Chad, Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo? What has happened is that we have had men and women in positions of privilege and political power whose only claim to fame is that they plunder their countries. The other tragedy is that they use young men and women. They recruit them. They either mobilize them on the basis of their ethnicity, or they mobilize them on the basis of bribery. So today, when we are gathered here, if we wanted to be pessimistic, we could give you a litany of negative things that happen and continue to happen in the continent of Africa, but that is not our purpose for gathering here today. Today, we are here to remind you, young men and women, that history has demonstrated not once, not twice, but times without number, that societies only realize their potential when their young men and women have vision and are dedicated to changing their societies. Indeed, if you look at the history of the world in the recent past, and I'll make it recent so that you can relate, you'll remember, many of you are not born, but if you have conversations with African Americans, you will be told that the civil rights movement in the 1960s, 1963, was led by young people. Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as the most prominent at that time. But there were other younger people, slightly older than Luther himself, Ralph Abernathy, Andrew Young, Jesse Jackson, the much more radical Malcolm X. But their agenda was one, that they were not going to run away from the United States of America. They were going to sit there and change the circumstances of their country so that it could be a better place to live in. They did not run away. In South Africa, when in the early 60s, the great, and even a little earlier, when people like Pixley Kaisa Kaseme, Albert Lutuli, Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe were fighting under the aegis of the African National Congress, they were young. They were not running away. Younger ones, even like Tiro Ngopotse and other younger people, they were convicted that it was their duty to change the circumstances of their countries. And of course, we have the tendency to equate leadership with politicians, which is misguided. They are the most visible, but some of the great leaders are moral leaders. People who are not in the political arena. South Africa will remember people like Desmond Pilo Tutu. They'll remember people like Alan Bussack and many others who are not in the political arena, but were the moral anchors for these particular movements. In fact, some of the greatest people who have contributed in the world and in Africa are men and women who are not practicing politicians in that sense. And in Africa, the entire struggle for independence was on the shoulders of young men and women. The church was present, although today the church has lost her prophetic voice. The church is now complicit in some of the evils that are being perpetrated in this continent because they are eloquent in their silence, even when pain is being visited upon young Africans. But yet I must agree that today the world is looking to her young people, and Africa much more so. If this continent is going to realize our potential, is going to do on the shoulders of our young men and women. If Africa's agriculture is going to improve, our young men and women must be involved in agriculture. If Africa is going to industrialize, our young men and women must be involved in the process of industrialization. If our health sector is going to improve and improve dramatically so that in times of pandemic, we are not running around the world with bowls in our hand, asking for vaccination from India, from the United States of America, from China, from Russia, from Germany, and from the United Kingdom, our young men and women, whether they are doctors or researchers or pharmacists or virologists, must be involved in the continent. If we are going to take advantage of our natural resources, if they are mines, it is us who must mine it, because history is consistent. History is consistent in demonstrating and revealing at once that the things that require effort can only be earned through effort. No amount of prayer and fasting is going to bring the things that require fasting. Indeed, I dare say, even aware that some clergymen are listening to me, that prayer without action is nothing but superstition. Africans must pray because pray they must. But I can tell you that the God that you worship and that I worship is not in the business of giving people what they do not work for. In fact, the divine instruction is go ye until the earth, and is by the sweat of thy brow that thou shalt eat. And you young men and women who think that your salvation lies in crossing the Mediterranean Sea to go into other lands are completely misguided. Does it ever concern you, young men and women? There are some of your kith and kin are crossing the Mediterranean Sea, and some are going to the Arab world. Young Chinese are coming into the continent. What is it that the young Chinese, many of them between ages 20 and 35, what is it that they are seeing in Zambia? That today you go to the streets of Zambia, they are Chinese. What is it that they are seeing in the streets of Johannesburg and Cape Town and Pretoria? What is it that they see in South Africa? What is it that they see in Accra, Ghana, in Monrovia, in Nairobi, in Kampala, in Rwanda, in Dar es Salaam that you cannot see? There is something in Africa. Africa is the place that has always been attractive to different civilizations. It was attractive to the Greeks. It was attractive to the Jews. It was attractive to the Turks. It was attractive to the Portuguese. It was attractive to the British. It was attractive to the Germans. It was attractive to the Belgians. It was attractive to the French. It was attractive to the Arab. There is something in Africa which makes her the receptacle of some of the greatest things on earth. And it is your duty, particularly you young men and women, to ensure that if Africa is not going to be enslaved again, and she can be enslaved, I'm already beginning to see the signs of Africa's enslavement. You know, I used to wonder, how is it that Africa was colonized? There are few white men, whether they were of Germany extraction or Dutch extraction, would come into the continent of Africa, and within a few years, they had conquered all of us, and we were enslaved, and if we were not enslaved, we were colonized. How did it happen that such a minority conquered us? I now understand. It started in the same way that I now see the Chinese coming into Africa. Slowly. We laugh at them. We laugh at it. But in 50 years from today, we'll not be laughing at it. You even today see images of some of the pain these are visiting upon our young people. If it is not in Kampala, it's Nairobi. And if it is not in Nairobi, it's in Senegal. You see the Chinese coming here, and in every university, they are opening the Confucius institutes. If it is not at a university in Nairobi, is at a university in Zambia, because they know that the mind is the standard of the man. Don't you now see in some African airports that the signage is in Chinese, not in Luganda, not in Yoruba, not in Kiswahili, in Chinese? These are some of the early signs that once again, if we are not careful, we are going to be mentally captured. And I'm telling you, therefore, to go out there as young men and women and begin to recognize sooner rather than later that it is your duty to think like Africans. What is Togo in the scheme of things? What is Cameroon in the scheme of things? What is Lesotho? What is Eswatini? What is Zambia? What is Cabo Verde? What is Comoros? What is Seychelles? What is Kenya? What is Burundi? What is Rwanda? Kwame Nkrumah was right. As long as we are divided, we are always going to be manipulated. It is you young men and women who must now knock down those mental boundaries and remember that these boundaries were artificially created in Berlin in 1884, and the reason why they were created was for the benefit of the colonizer, so that the Germans could have their territory, so that the Italians could have their territory, the British their territory, the Belgians their territory, the English their territory, the Dutch their territory, the French their territory, and the Portuguese their territory. We inherited them. And you now go to an African country. I travel to South Africa and I need a visa. I travel to Namibia and I need a visa. And a young girl or a young boy at the airport asks me, what have you come to do in Windhoek? And in the same line, he or she sees a white man and rushes to serve him, saying, sir, how can I help you? Welcome to Namibia. Mental slavery. We must decolonize our minds. We must begin to think differently. See an African and remember that Togolese means nothing. Remember that Nigeria means nothing. What means something is that we are of African origin, and the beauty of Africa is the uniqueness of our diversity. The God that we worship is a God of diversity. If you understand that, then you will understand that your duty is to serve in the continent of Africa. There is a young man who is my friend and my mentee called Osman Toure. He is from the Gambia. The young man said something which I would want you to consider. He had the opportunity of going out in Europe to study, but he chose to leave his country, the Gambia, and is now studying as I speak in Rwanda. That is the kind of confidence that I would want us to have in our institutions. You can go to the University of Lagos. You can go to Cheikh Anta Diop University in Dakar in Senegal. You can go to Agostino Neto University in Luanda in Angola. You can go to the Walter Sisulu University in South Africa. You can visit the University of Mpumalanga. You can go to the university in Dar es Salaam or Makerere. You don't have to go out there and tell me I went to Harvard. I went to Cambridge, and you tell me that Harvard is the best law school in the world. Which law do they teach? Do they teach Zambian law? They are only good in American law. And yet, because of your mental slavery, you believe that that is the truth. We can now look elsewhere in the world and begin to see what is happening. You go to Vietnam, which was at war when I was a Form 1 student. You go to Vietnam now. Vietnam produces more coffee than all East African countries combined. You go to South Korea, which was at war in 1953. Today, when you buy a phone, whether it's Samsung or whether you buy a Hyundai, is from Korea. You go to China, which was a backwater country only a few years ago. Look at every item on your desk, even as I speak. Half of them are made in China, including the toothpicks that you have used after you have taken your lunch. Why? Because they have faith in themselves. When they come to Africa, they are not running away from Africa. They are coming to Africa to work for their country and to return the money back to their kith and kin. But I've seen young Africans boasting, I cannot have my child born in Africa. We live in a continent where some in the middle class, when their wives are expectant, they go to the United States so that their children can become citizens of the United States of America. What kind of a people are we? What kind of a people are we? We must ask ourselves. If we want to be respected by other civilizations, we must demonstrate by word and deed that we have faith in ourselves. This is the mother continent. This is the continent where all civilization came. Let us make her proud again. Let us make this continent proud so that in 20 years from today, the promises that African politicians have made on our behalf in Africa Agenda 2063 will become true. Let us make it true so that the promises that we have made to ourselves under the African Free Continental Free Trade Area will become true. Let us make it so that Africa can feed herself. Let us make it so that the cocoa that is produced in Cote d'Ivoire, in Togo, and in Ghana does not go to Switzerland, which does not produce any cocoa and yet is the greatest exporter of chocolate in the world. Let us add value. Let us ensure that the rubber that is produced in Liberia is used to make tires in this part of the world. Let us be a country that can make our own medicine and our own vaccines. Let us be a country and a continent that can feed ourselves. Let us be a country that can mine iron and mine gold and refine it. Let us be a country that can, a continent that can make things that will suit our people. And I'm using the word country deliberately and continent interchangeably because I look forward to the day when the words of the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah will come true and we will be able to say that the borders that we have are only good for purposes of administration, but I'll be able to travel from Dakar in Senegal to Djibouti in Djibouti and nobody will ask me for a visa. That I'll be able to have one currency. Today, Africa has no less than 33 currencies, none of which is considered as hard currency. You who are in West Africa, if you move from Ghana, you fly for 1 hour, you are using a cedi, you go into Nigeria, you are using a naira, you go to Togo, you are using CFA franc, you move from there, you go to Angola, you are using Kwanza, you leave Angola with your Kwanza, you go to Zambia, you are using the Kwacha, you go to Malawi, you are using the Kwacha, you go to Mozambique, you are using the Metical, you come to Kenya, you are using the shilling, you go to Ethiopia, you are using the birr, while in China, a population of 1 billion, they are using only 1 yuan. The United States of America, $1, 27 countries in Europe, only 1 euro. We must retool. We must begin to think differently. The 54 visas that we must use, we must obtain, or 54 passports must be replaced with 1 passport, as the leader said in Kigali in Rwanda. It can't be done. And it's only you young men and women who, through organization, can bring pressure to bear on the political leadership so that they may begin to do the right thing. Remember that most African political leaders like us the way we are, divided as we are, so that they can continue to rip and rape Africa, as we have seen in the history of this continent. Part of the pain that has been visited upon Africa has not been by the colonialists, but by their hirelings and acolytes whom we made presidents post-colonialism and post-independence. So it is our duty as we look to the future to remember that this is the mother continent. But when I look at Africa, I can see certain good things that are happening, and I travel across Africa sufficiently to know that they are good things, sufficiently to know that when I go to Namibia, I see good things, that when I go to Botswana, I see some good things. When I go to Rwanda, I see certain good things. I go to Dar es Salaam, I see certain good things. When I go to Malawi, I see certain good things. I go to Ghana, I see certain good things. I go to Senegal, I see certain good things. It is these good things that we must focus on. And lo and behold, I have no doubt that it shall come to pass. And this continent will be where it ought to be, in the dinner table of human civilization, respected as she should. But the burden is yours. If you don't work for it, if you don't work at it, if you are not sacrificial about your contribution to Africa, Africa will always be in the lower rungs of human civilization.